there is a lot in the information zone these days, and certainly on major mainstream media, about a potential looming strike from Iran against Israel in retaliation to theirs. And we've been covering it a lot here, this back and forth tit for tat. Some have even been talking about things that have been going on in the Hezbollah, in the Hamas fight in the Gaza Strip. That obviously gets a lot of attention. What hasn't gotten much attention at all, though, really in any media space, has been what's been happening in the southern Lebanon front with Hezbollah. And I've always held that that's one of the more important ones, because that is, in really any way you want to look at it, it's a full-on invasion of southern Lebanon, and it has taken a real toll on the Israeli forces. But we haven't had much information to be able to see what's actually happening, other than a lot of, frankly, propaganda type statements coming in from the Israeli side. But today we are going to pierce that veil with Alex of History Legends. And I know it's one of the fan faves that we have here. We've had Alex on before, and listen, we are super psyched to have you on for this show today. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thanks for inviting me over and over again. It's always a pleasure.
It is, and for us, I think even more so. And listen, you've just dropped a new video, and it's in the description here, and we certainly invite everyone to go and watch that as soon as you're done here. But I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what motivated you to make this extraordinarily good video.
Thank you. Well, first of all, it's a very controversial video to start with, and to say the least. But it's mostly because nobody has covered it in a very thorough way. It's always about airstrikes, missiles, but we don't understand what's actually happening on the ground. So I decided to put in the time and to look at every day what happened. And I wanted to do one video to cover the entire month of October, because like you said, this war between Israel and Hezbollah, it's an important one. It's an important one. And there was a round one in 2006. So I think it needed to be brought up.
Yeah, it definitely did. And because, and I think that people are going to see as we go through the time here, just so people understand what we're going to do, is I'm taking a number of clips from that video, and then I'm going to ask you to expand on some things. So it's not a replication of what you've done on your video. So people definitely need to go see that video for the full context when this is over. But the first one I want to go, because you start from October 1st and go all the way through October 31st. So you literally cover the whole month. And I think this comprehension is going to really put things in a better light. So let's start from the beginning. On day one, you talked about how they initially went in.
The first formation to attack was the Egoz Battalion of the 89th Commando Brigade. Egoz is a Hebrew acronym for anti-guerrilla and small-scale warfare. It's not a surprise that Egoz spearheaded the invasion, since its operatives are trained in long-range solo navigations. Essentially, these guys will camouflage themselves in the terrain and try to detect enemy formations and call in airstrikes when necessary. As you can see in these pictures, their skill is really concealment and recon. As you can see in this video, Israeli troops pushed across the border by foot, but also using light vehicles instead of big, bulky, armored ones. In Lebanon, thicker is not always better. Right here you can see how Israeli troops advanced with modified Humvees with no doors, and with some sort of cage covered in a camouflage net at the rear, possibly as a defense against enemy drones, aka a direct lesson from the war going on right now in Ukraine.
And those are two of the things on that clip I really want to talk in some little bit more depth. Is first of all, you say because thicker isn't always better, which most people think, well, man, you go in this with this heavy fist and you just go in and breaking down doors and kicking stuff. But you say that's not better. Why do you say that?
Well, because the fighting is, when we look at the fighting in South Lebanon, we have to look at the weapons that Hezbollah have. So they have so many ATGMs, rockets, and mines. Having big, bulky vehicles just make for bigger targets. And we saw this in the Ukraine war. There's a reason why the Russians now use infiltration tactics using small infantry units whenever they can, because this is harder to detect with drones. It's harder to detect against artillery, so they can infiltrate enemy positions. And this is exactly what the Israelis have done. The first wave was just infantry, actually. And then they moved up the hills to clear any ATGM nest that could be aimed at the roads. And that's the biggest difference, too, between this offensive and the one from 2006. In 2006, the Israelis charged head-on with tank comms, and they got obliterated. They lost a lot of troops like that, a lot of vehicles. This time they said, let's use light vehicles. And honestly, we don't know if Hezbollah had FPV drones available. They could use them. So imagine if they have FPV drones and ATGMs. You want to have small units that encircle and flank these operators. And this is what we've been seeing. Every ATGM strike is very long range units that are hiding in the woods, and they're just firing and using the camera to guide their strike. But so yeah, if you have big bulky vehicles, it's very easy for ATGM units to pick them off. Now, the big difference now with the Israelis is that not only they attack with small infantry units, just like in Ukraine, is that they're using light vehicles. And this is something that's very new even for them.
And I want to get onto that because you made the comment there at the end of that clip that they are learning some lessons from the Russia-Ukraine war as well. But there's always this trade-off between having the lighter, more mobile vehicles, but also the firepower and protection from the armored vehicles. So doesn't that make them more vulnerable to the kinds of weapons that the Hezbollah side might have?
Yes, exactly. Well, this is the trade-off they decided to use. So the advantage of these light vehicles is that they can go uphill. They can go up these rocky hills. So imagine you have a crest, a ridge. You can go very fast up that ridge with these vehicles and dismount an infantry unit there, and then you can go back. So you're very mobile, and you don't have to use the paved roads. So you're faster, lighter, more mobile, and you can hit areas that normally you can't. Now, with big bulky vehicles, yes, you have more firepower, but that only works if you know where the enemy is. We're talking about some sort of guerrilla warfare. You don't know in what building the enemy is hidden. So they're going to see you before you're going to see them. And for the firepower, let's not forget that the Israelis are using their air force to do most of the strikes, whether with aircraft or drones. So the biggest role is to target enemy units and then call in artillery or aviation. But armored vehicles become a liability. It becomes a big problem. As we've seen in Gaza, how many men fell? How many Israeli soldiers fell because their entire vehicle got hit by an RPG? A lot of soldiers fell like that. So this time they decided to go lighter, and it seems to be working.
Okay, so and that leads me to the next clip here about the air power. Here's how that was covered in your video.
Meanwhile, as part of Operation Northern Arrows, the Israeli Air Force provided air support as they struck dozens of Hezbollah targets, such as headquarters, storage facilities, and surface-to-air missile launchers of various ranges.
How effective have the strikes been? Do we know what the battle damage assessment is of these strikes, especially because they're so far inland?
To be honest, we don't know 100%. I mean, it's like any aerial campaign. However, what we do know is that southern Lebanon is Israel's backyard. They know it as if it's their own territory. They've been fighting there for 40 years. So they have informants, they have drones that see what's happening. And yeah, they target buildings. The big problem is that a lot of the tunnels and a lot of the weapon depots are under residential buildings. So yeah, there's some areas that are targeted and some villages that are destroyed. It's tragic, but that's the reality of the fighting there. And Hezbollah knows this. They know where to hide their bases as to. But yeah, we don't really know. We'll know in the next few weeks if the Israeli offensive keeps going or not. In 2006, the problem was that they didn't have enough intel during their airstrike. So, in my opinion, in 2006, they did like this sort of Desert Storm aerial campaign and bombarded mostly civilian infrastructure, but it wasn't as targeted as it is now, in my opinion. So once again, they've learned their lesson. And the biggest difference is that in 2006, they only bombed southern Lebanon for a couple weeks. However, this time it's been almost a year that they've bombarded this region. So whenever they saw units, they destroyed it. And eventually it took its toll on Hezbollah, in my opinion.
So let's look at the other half of that equation. How does Hezbollah defend against these airstrikes, given that they don't have any air defense, they don't have any air power of their own? How do they keep from just getting obliterated?
Well, that's the thing. Hezbollah bragged about having a lot of equipment, but I still haven't seen all this equipment being used. So we know they have anti-ship missiles. We know they have anti-air capabilities. They do, but I expected them to do some sort of ambushes to disconnect their air defense and then activate it the moment their aircraft are coming. But I haven't seen it yet. So either it was all propaganda from their side, or there might be some more surprises. Same thing for the rockets. We see that they have to fire a lot of rockets to have one hit. Now, I'm not saying that. The thing is, Hezbollah only needs one hit to be successful. So if they launch one barrage, if one of the rockets hits a barrack with Israeli soldiers, it's a win. So that's the problem. For the Israelis, they have to be successful 100% of the time. Hezbollah only has to be successful one time during their strike. But still, there's an attrition in terms of equipment on their side, because whenever they fire these rockets, especially now that troops are moving in, they're being spotted. So any light artillery units, MRLS, that they're using in the woods or in the forest are being spotted more than ever, especially now that there's Israeli commandos roaming in the region. So from what I've seen, most ATGMs are being fired from woods. They're always being fired at from places that is you cannot recognize where they're at. They're fire and they use the camera to guide their strike. But this makes it that they have to fire from multiple kilometers away. And I would even go as far as to say that they've been outplayed compared to 2006, because in 2006, Hezbollah had ATGM units on the crests looking over the roads. So Hezbollah was preparing for a war against mechanized formations. So they have a lot of units equipped with ATGMs, but they can't do much against waves of infantrymen coming in. So I think that's the thing. They have to fire and try to hit Merkava tanks or units with these missiles, but they can't really hold the ground at this moment.
Right, and you mentioned the emphasis on infantrymen. So we already talked about you've shown how they had a lot of the lighter vehicles than the big tanks and the infantry fighting vehicles. And here's a section where you're specifically talking about what Israel's doing on the ground.
They put the emphasis on infantry maneuvers advancing along crests and hilltops in order to clear the path for mechanized formations from enemy ATGM nests and various bunkers. And if they need to move quickly, they will use light vehicles along these same rocky hills and avoid the valleys that are certainly mined and set for ambushes. This method is certainly slower, but it is also meant to reduce casualties.
So, to what extent has Hezbollah learned any lessons? You've talked to several places where the Israeli Defense Forces did learn lessons from both the 2006 Lebanon's war as well as what's going on in Russia, Ukraine. But have you seen any evidence so far that Hezbollah has learned? For example, have they learned to counter the changed Israeli tactics? Instead of coming in with heavy armor and instead of going into the valleys, they're actually going up on the crest, as you say.
Well, for now, it's pretty new. It's been 1 month into the war, and I can't see a big difference in the way Hezbollah is fighting compared to before, other than that they have more firepower. So I think the big difference between 2006 is that they know that they can't really hold a position against the IDF. And so their best bet is to just fire some rockets from anywhere in Lebanon and hope that it hits some Israeli unit. We've seen a lot of Israeli units, supply units, engineering units being hit, the ones at the rear, because those are the ones that are not mobile. So they can be picked off more easily. So we've seen company commanders, platoon leaders at the rear being hit, targeted, and barracks. Those are most of the Israeli casualties. A lot of them are at the rear, the units that are not moving. So the Hezbollah has learned in a way that they have increased their firepower. But I haven't seen, for example, FPV drones being used. They do have drones, but not the same type of drones that we would see, for example, in Ukraine, where you have these small drones with a camera striking random infantry units. We haven't seen that yet.
And do you have any idea of why that may be? Because I frankly was shocked at that. With so much visibility on what the Ukraine and the Russians are both doing in there with FPV drones, I figured that would be they'd be stocking up long before this happened. But I at least no video has been shown to see that happen. Do you have any speculation why that might be?
I'm surprised. I'm as surprised as you. I expected waves of FPV drones to strike Israeli units, and this would have stopped them right in their track because Israelis cannot afford many casualties. But I don't know why we haven't seen waves of FPV drones. I actually don't know that. I mean, that would have been the best bet for Hezbollah. Maybe Israel has good electronic warfare, but I doubt that it's that efficient that no FPV drone is being used. Yeah, good question. Because if you put yourself in the shoes of Hezbollah, you want to use every strike as propaganda win. So having drones just crash into a tank, even if the tank is not destroyed, is a propaganda win, is a PR stunt. But
Yeah.
even one drone that goes into a vehicle, especially those buggies and 4x4s, it does a lot of damage.
It would indeed. A couple of times in your video, you mentioned something about the quote first line of defense of the Hezbollah side, or some of the other times, especially up in I believe it's in the northeastern part, et cetera.
Mhm.
What does a line of defense for Hezbollah look like? And have you been able to identify how many lines there are? Is it anything like the Surovikin line that the Russians used?
No, it's not nearly as fortified as the Surovikin line simply because they have to be hidden from the air. They have to be camouflaged from firepower. So those are subtle lines of bunkers and villages. So when I say first line of defense, it's because this is the line that Hezbollah held for more than a week. And it was the first belt of villages right after crossing the border. So the first line is the first belt of villages along the border. And then there's the second belt of villages. So it changes. It's very mobile. Hezbollah is using a defense in depth. That's their best bet in this war. But they know this. They know this.
Well, and
So
so that leads to the next question. So some experts that I have queried suggest that what Hezbollah is doing is a form of warfare we've seen a lot of times where they would, quote, draw the enemy in certain places to conduct basically a fighting withdrawal back to some line that only they knew, where they were going to die in place. Or this is a no pin line, as used in the American military. So they would fight down to here, and form like a cauldron of sorts, and then they would unleash some of the bigger firepower. Or they don't have that capacity and they're just getting pushed back. How do you view that?
yeah, that's exactly their battle plan. But this is being countered by waves of infantrymen coming from the top. So yeah, they want to create these bottlenecks and ambush points. But if you have small infantry units just crawling through the mountains, you setting this ambush would put yourself at risk of being targeted. So it becomes very complicated. Now, I do think that they're fighting some sort of fighting retreats. That's for sure. They have these weapon depots, and I haven't seen, I don't want to sound gore, but a lot of casualties on the ground. I think they have these weapon caches. They fire all the ammunition they can, and then they withdraw to another point. So they only know exactly where these weapon depots are, but they can't hold the terrain. So the problem is, and that's what the Israelis are doing. So they know that they come in an area and they're going to search for all the bunkers and underground positions to make sure that this area is cleared, to make sure that this area cannot be turned around. For example, we've seen that in North Gaza, where at one point they say, yeah, it's secured, it's all good, and fighting is flaring up again. So I think a lot of the, of course, I'm looking at it from a very cold and military perspective. I'm not looking at the humanitarian. I'm trying not to be
Yeah.
emotional in this because it would blur the understanding and the tactical analysis. But they understand that they have to push the population away. So that's why they send these warnings and they try to push the civilians out of these areas, because if you have civilians roaming in the rear, it's possible fighters, especially if there's weapon caches that are not discovered yet. So they're taking their time. They also learned from Gaza that it would be crazy to think that they haven't learned from Gaza.
So that's one of the things that I also noticed, and unfortunately, I didn't clip this part of your video, but you had shown graphically on the map all the places where, from day one up until just yesterday, how far the Israeli Defense Forces have penetrated at the various points of the front, and it didn't look that far to me. It seems like it's pretty low, given the number of casualties that you reported the Israelis have, which was, I think it was 42 killed and between 400 and 500 wounded, which seems like a pretty high number to me. How do you see that? Is that surprising, or is it evidence of trouble?
Well, yes, I was surprised too. But before, in the summer, I thought of I put it in the video, like a sample, that I thought the Israelis would really push on several axes with all speed and try to bypass points of resistance. But I think they decided to do a modified version of their 2006 plan. That is to first of all secure, let's say, the entire border area, and they didn't push too much in every direction, but like it's a 3 kilometer belt all along the border. And I think that was phase one of the offensive. And they want to make sure to secure this entire area before moving to step two. Now, we might think, what is the objective? I think if Israel stops where they stop now, it was pointless and it's a defeat because they did not achieve anything apart from destroying tunnels and seizing weapons and ammunition. But all this can be rebuilt pretty quickly. The real objective, in my opinion, is to capture the area of set by the UN Resolution 1701. Because let's not forget, from a political perspective, the fact that UN peacekeepers are in the area was meant to ensure that this area is not becoming militarized again, and clearly that failed.
Yeah, you showed quite a few of the videos were right in the shadows of the UN locations. You actually showed that several times. That was had to be a real embarrassment for really all the advocates of that. But then that gets to the bigger question: is what is the objective? Is it to literally conquer all the area up to the Litani River? Because that would take quite a number of months, and that would sustain a lot of casualties. And there's going to be a question: can Israel sustain itself over that time, even if it's not some kind of a grand plan for the Hezbollah side to draw them in and then bring out some other kind of weapon systems? But do you think that is the objective of the Israeli side?
I would say that it would be the most logical objective. I don't know what their objective is. I don't know how many reserves they have available, but I do know from a geographic standpoint, this is the most likely scenario. Now, I do want to draw your attention that if you go in my video, you'll see that in the northern sector, this is where the Litani River sharply turns to the west. Now, if the Israelis manage to capture this area, it's a very strategic area because this is the supply line, the logistics line of the entire Hezbollah forces in southern Lebanon. So the problem with doing videos like that is that there's so much to say, and you have to find a way to say it in the best way possible. But the thing is, Hezbollah units can get cut off as well from their own supply bases that are in Syria. So if the Israelis try to strangle and encircle southern Lebanon, which is possible, then it's going to be difficult. It's going to be really difficult. So I think it's just like any front line in Ukraine. When we say, look at the rate of advance of the Russians, it's going to take 300 years for them to move to this point. But I'm like, yeah, but now we're seeing them move much faster than before. So there comes a breaking point in any battle where, yeah, there's a battle of attrition, and then there's a breaking point, and people make a lot of gains at one point.
But see, here's one of my frustrations, or maybe that's not the right word. Something that puzzles me, because even if you establish the 1701 line, what then? Up to the Litani River, what would you do then? Because unless you're going to continue rolling all the way up north, Hezbollah they'll just fall back to successive lines, and we know that they already have positions really all throughout Lebanon. You're still going to have the same problem. You're still going to be within rocket range. You're still going to have that northern front. And then will Israel have to permanently garrison that? Will they bring Israeli people in to settle that? Will they allow Lebanese people to come back into that area? I don't see any answers to any of those.
Well, no, it's a very good point. The thing is, from what I've seen, most rocket bases are located north of the Litani River. So if the Israelis do get there, it's going to destroy 20 years of building deep tunnels. It's going to be very complicated for Hezbollah. Now, yeah, they can build successive lines in the north, but you have to remember that the main population supporting Hezbollah are Shia Muslims, and they're only located in the south of Lebanon and in the northeast in the Bekaa Valley, bordering Syria. Now, without the support, they cannot build fortifications or even hide. Christians are relatively neutral, but they don't really like Hezbollah, but they kind of like them. It's depending on the situation. It's just that north of the Litani River, you go out of the Shia Lebanese area. So it's out of, like you've been in Iraq, that once you change the zones, it's not the same group of people anymore. And the guerrillas are not going to have the same support in that area at all. In some areas, the people are going to welcome you, actually. So like we've seen in some Maronite Christian villages that fell very quickly in the south of Lebanon. So you only need a couple informants to know where the weapon caches are.
Yeah, certainly true. I definitely saw that at one really stark place when I was traveling around with the convoy in the Mosul area of Iraq, and everything was the security was terrible and the risks were very high. And then all of a sudden we rolled just a little bit further up that into some of the Kurdistan areas, and it's like we went into a time warp, and all this, and everything's free, it's open, it's modern, and they're all friendly towards us. So it was yeah, it's a really good point. I've seen that.
So for example, you wouldn't imagine if the insurgents in Iraq you faced would now be pushed towards the Kurdish areas. They can't hold this area. Actually, it's not going to work out. So yeah, they could spread out. That's very possible of happening, but there is an objective of having the north of the Litani River. I can't look at the magic map or magic crystal ball of what's going to happen. I just know that from a military standpoint, this is the objective. This could be the objective.
Well, let's see what actually Benjamin Netanyahu, because he has actually addressed this before. Here's what he had to say.
We are here in the state of Israel. We are the real barrier in Iran's path, and we thwart its malicious intentions. Because according to Iran's method, if Israel will fall, many countries will fall along with it, and the entire Middle East will fall into its hands. But we do not fall. We will win. And the entire world will be a better place, a safer place. Our victory will not be just for us. It will be for all of humanity. At the beginning of the war, I defined the main objectives of the campaign, and we are working consistently to achieve them. The elimination of the governing and military capabilities of Hamas in the Gaza Strip and the return of all our precious hostages back home. And we also stipulated thwarting any future threat from Gaza to Israel and returning the residents of the South and the North safely to their homes. This is the meaning of absolute victory, not as a mere headline uttered into space, nor rhetoric void of substance, rather the opposite. The absolute victory is an orderly and consistent work plan, which we fulfill step by step.
Yeah, and for that total victory to be accomplished, and what he specified there, all of the Israeli people be able to go back to their borders. That means everything north of the border has to be completely pacified. And that is a really tall military task.
First of all, it's very bold language, I have to admit, but notice how he says this in Hebrew. So it's meant for Israeli population. And I think it's meant for a specific demographic of the Israeli population. Because I think in his English language, he would use different terms. It's very warlike, but in a sense, you said, how long can they sustain this? And this is some sort of answer. The big difference with 2006 too is that in 2006 they stopped operations quickly into the war. They actually fought on the ground maybe 2 weeks, from what I remember. We say it took a month. In reality, the actual fighting, it's 1 week. and they stopped after 1 week. Now it's been over a year. They've been fighting in Gaza.
Yeah.
And it's the longest war I think they had to fight on multiple fronts ever. But
Ever. Yeah.
he knows this is the only moment that they can use this total war strategy, because the moment they stop, the population is not going to move forward with it. So now the population feels attacked on all sides, and he has to rally them up. Let's not forget that there are many political parties in Israel, a lot of them that hate Netanyahu. So he has to find a way to rally the population and be shown as the leader. I'm not advocating for what he says. I'm not talking about political stuff. I'm just looking at the military aspect of this war. But it just gives you an insight on how people see it. And I think the same way people talk about how the Russians are deserting en masse, it's the same way of people say, yeah, they don't want to fight. I haven't seen many people in Israel outright not go into the military or refuse their duty. There are, of course, but not as many as people claim. And yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I want to show when I say that seems like a very, very difficult military task, to be able to pacify all that area south of the Litani River, which I'll show here on the map in just a second. But I want to pull this one section that you hear because you told about how they have to clear a path here, and I want to show why that's so hard.
We can see that the slow pace of advance of Israeli troops is done on purpose. The most important is that all tunnels and weapon caches are found, so that rear operating areas are safe from ambushes. These mop-up operations also take time because each house has to be cleared one by one, especially since tunnels and underground bases are linked to each other via residential buildings.
Now, I specifically chose that part because here's a map of some of the key areas here. The Moron El Ras, you've mentioned Tehran. I'm terrible with the pronunciation of these. Ben Shabil. But I mean, just look in some of this. If you're talking about how they have to clear individual houses, and they've gone, I think they've actually taken this part at this point. But I mean, just look at all of this built up area and you can't just clear each one of these buildings, and you can't just skip them, because I think, as you talked about other places, that one of the biggest casualty producers for the Israeli side has been in the rear. So they have an area they think is clear, but all of a sudden it's not, because they have tunnels. They have tunnels in some of these areas.
It's rocket attacks. The rocket attacks take place from 10, 20 kilometers or 5, 6 kilometers within Hezbollah lines. So it's not as if it's guys. It's not like in Gaza where you have actual guys crawling up the tunnels. I think we cannot underestimate the fact that they have been observing the entire region of South Lebanon for a year, at least. A lot. And they've noticed patterns of people going into certain buildings. So they do have a map. And once again, they know the area. So they know the areas. Let's say they have a map of areas with the most likely places of having a building. And the thing is, once you go into a building and you do find a tunnel, well, you follow the tunnel and then you find the other building. So this goes to show it's an engineering battle. It goes to show that the future of soldiers is having like the Roman soldiers, so some sort of soldiers, but that are also capable of doing engineering work, demolition work. This is, in the guerrilla war, you need more than just riflemen. You need guys that are capable of doing multiple tasks. So they're doing that. Is it successful? It's too soon to say, but they did capture the first line of defense. And for now, I haven't seen that much pushback. But they're coming to the pushback. There are some big urban areas, and we'll see how that goes. But for now, it's just that I expected much more from Hezbollah units. Like there's been so much talk about their combat units. I made videos saying how strong they are, and it's falling apart. And I'm like, where have we been lied to?
Well, so that's one of the questions I had as well. One of the big threats that everybody always made from the beginning since October 7th, 23. That Hezbollah has 150,000 rockets and missiles, and many of them are modern stuff they've gotten. from Iran. Many of they built themselves, etc. And yet we keep seeing these small batches, maybe 100 here, 50 there, etc. We haven't seen any kind of massive deal, which could potentially absolutely overwhelm and saturate the air defenses of the Israeli side and cause a lot of damage. Do you have any sense for why that is?
I don't have an answer for this, but I'll explain something else. I think that Hezbollah did not know about the attack by Hamas. I think Hamas attacked on its own, and out of a sudden, Hezbollah was on the front line. So they had this rhetoric of being strong, but they did not prepare for war. And the only thing that tells me that is that if Hezbollah was seriously thinking of a war against Israel, they would have attacked on October 8th. They would have launched tens of thousands of soldiers, fired tens of thousands of rockets on October 8th. Or even worse, they would have waited that Israel is bogged down in Gaza, and once Israel has all its troops in Gaza, they attack. This is what an alliance would do. This is what would have pinned down Israel for real. But that didn't happen. If they really wanted to attack, they should have attacked right at the beginning, but they didn't. So I think there was some sort of mild response. They knew this wasn't possible. So we often talk about, Hezbollah has a lot of troops, but a lot of their troops are also militiamen. So the guy's an electrician, so he works 40 hours as an electrician, but he has an AK. Thing is, everybody in Lebanon has an AK. You just have to go there, and everybody has weapons. So it's very easy to boost the numbers of your troops, but how many people are actually willing to fight? That's different, So you have a core of fighters for sure.
So you mentioned in the video that 42 Israeli troops have been killed and somewhere between 400 and 500 wounded, which is a pretty substantial number given the 4 or maybe I think it's 5 divisions that are taking part in various places of this. Do you have any sense for what the Hezbollah side is suffering?
Well, that's the thing. I wish I could explain this better in the video. It's only looking at the comments, but I didn't use the numbers by the IDF of how many enemy insurgents they targeted, because those numbers it's blind. You don't know if the building has 1 person, 0, or 10. So I didn't use these numbers, and I'm not gonna talk too much about enemy casualties of Hezbollah casualties from the Israeli perspective, because we don't know. Hezbollah stopped reporting their own losses. The only one reporting their losses is Israel. So I can only work with the information available. I cannot say so many. Just that from experience in such guerrilla wars, it's 1 to 10. I don't know, from your experience in Iraq. I mean, did we all remember, the Iraqi insurgents also claimed to have inflicted heavy casualties on the Americans all the time, but was it really that high?
Almost never. Because I saw those from the Taliban, et cetera, from the Iraqi insurgencies, and it was rarely, maybe even never, actually as high as they said. Now, I have seen some claims from the Hezbollah side of inflicting, I think, 20 or 30 Markava tank losses, but you mentioned in there that you'd only seen physical evidence of 1.
Yeah, and I'm like, look, if I was a Hezbollah admin and you have all these ATGMs they use have cameras. You can't tell me that you can't show the strike. I mean, in Russia, Ukraine, this is the norm now. Every destroyed tank has to be proven on the battlefield, and they know this. This is part of the war of information. Yeah. So why would you keep the information from the public when you need public support more than ever? Even if you use different weapons, everybody has a phone. Just take a picture of it.
Right.
There's nothing. So I'm like, I want to believe these numbers, but for now, I've seen 1 evidence of an actual strike. That's it.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to keep watching that one. In the last section here, I want to look to what's next. It's toward the end of your video. You talked a little bit about some of the things that are coming next. Let's watch this first.
Here, Le Parisien reported, after a year of war, Israel is short of soldiers. If the IDF can replenish its ranks, this is what we can expect on the South Lebanon front. We could see Israeli forces clear this forested area near the coast from where a lot of ATGMs are fired from. In the center, the IDF will most likely storm the urban area of Bin Shbil, which could quickly turn into a quagmire. Meanwhile, another grouping could flank the hilltop settlement of Barashit from the east. The objective of this combined maneuver will be to secure this road, and then move north towards the next Hezbollah strongpoint, Tebin. In the north, the IDF could push towards Et Taibeh and the Litani River. At the same time, the eastern grouping could storm Khiam and use it as a stepping stone towards Marjayun. This could open the road to the Bekaa Valley, an important Hezbollah stronghold, or even allow an attack across the northern side of the Litani River.
Now, I want to run back real quick to the map to kind of put some things into context here. You see some of the area where the Israelis have already succeeded in, and I think the Ben Jabil area is right down here that you had referenced there. Some others are up in this area, but you see that in terms of the overall area, it's still relatively small, and there's a lot of tough terrain and lots of cities, even south of the Litani River, where they have some strongholds. And then the question, I guess, has to be counted. Can Israel continue this high pace of operations and still suffer in those of casualties for a country that has, what is it, like 8 million total people with the limited reserves? That's the big question. Can they accomplish that objective?
That's a very good question. And I think what they're doing should be some sort of warning sign for a lot of Western countries. So they have a birth rate that is pretty limited. They have a birth rate that is pretty limited. So I think they rely a lot on reservists during their military operations. Now, reservists, a lot of them are 40, but we've seen volunteers that are up to 50. And I think for any Western army to know how to use older soldiers is very important. War is not fought with 18, 19-year-old kids anymore. There's just not enough of them. And you're just sacrificing the demographic future of your nation by doing so. So I think there's lessons that are being learned. We see this in Ukraine too. There's a reason why it's men in their 40s that are sent to the front, because you don't want to lose the future of your nation. Even if you win the war, what's the point to win the war when there's nobody to continue? So you want to preserve the youth. Now in Israel, the youth are going to be active duty personnel. So they've been taking a hit, but they also have a massive pool of reservists. And this is what I want to talk about. 70% of Israelis, maybe more, go through military service at some point. And a lot of female do it too. So a lot of positions that can be at the rear can be held by women, policing and stuff like that. So these positions, all these men that would have been there can be sent elsewhere. And you have a lot of reservists being involved in the fighting. Reservists are useful because they can hold the terrain. But I've seen areas where reservists are also attacking places. I mean, at 24, you were a reservist, and you haven't forgotten everything you've learned. And there's constant drills with your reserve brigade along the years. You have to do regular training. So they know they only have limited manpower, but they're drilled constantly. They have to use the reserves. Now, in that article, and I mentioned it in the video about the health services, is that a lot of Israeli soldiers got wounded during the war, and they do have a limit of manpower, but they have untapped pool of manpower as well. For example, the Orthodox or the more right-wing population. So the Orthodox Jews that have voting power, but that don't serve in the military, and they're not. There's no enforcement, so it's on voluntary basis. But there's growing voices in Israel. They're saying, "Look, our sons and daughters are dying. You have to do your part as well." So you have potentially thousands of men that can be drafted. There's Arab Israelis that are not men who don't have to go through mandatory military service, but that's another pool of manpower. Don't know if they want to give them weapons and military training, but they're Israeli citizens. They've been quite silent in this war because they have all the benefits of being an Israeli citizen. It's a complicated topic, so I'm not even going to go into that. But they have reserves. the big problem is the economy too. So the fact that this is a long war, they can't just draft everybody and do a 6-day war like in the past, or 2 weeks like in the Yom Kippur. They can't just draft everybody, stop the economy, and fight. In this prolonged fighting, you need a reserve system where you call in reservists, and then new guys come in, and then new guys come in. So there's a rotation, and the slow pace of advances does that. They can't go too fast. And for me, it's not surprising because we've seen how it is in Gaza. We've seen how it is in Gaza. But Hezbollah is really the nemesis of the IDF because they lost that battle in 2006. They lost the battle.
Yeah. So let's look at that half of the equation about what's coming next. What do you expect Hezbollah to do? Do you expect any change in their tactics? Do you think they have enough manpower to continue to fight a fighting withdrawal, so to speak? And how far can they go before they run out of terrain to actually give up?
It all depends. Look, in the video, I show at one point that the Israelis tried to run across the coastal area and they got stopped. Like, this is an axis of attack that did not work out for the Israelis. They actually suffered heavy losses there. Heavy, in relation to their total number of losses. Yeah. But it was difficult, and they did not push on. They rerouted and redeployed 2 of these brigades, 2 out of 4, to the northern front. And when I was studying the potential war between Hezbollah and Israel in the summer, I thought that the most logical thing would be to simply push in the north, not even try to attack in the south, because the south, it would fall anyway if the north falls. So there is some sort of strategy that you want to have. So yeah, you can attack everywhere at once. It's not going to be very efficient. Now, Israel now is doing some sort of maneuver that I've thought about, is that they're concentrating in the north. Because if you take hold of that intersection of the Litani River, so Marjayun, Khiam, and the northern sector, then you can push along the river and encircle Hezbollah forces. So here, you see Marjayun a little bit to the left, a little bit, yeah, here. So there's a town called Deir Mimas. This is the intersection of the Litani River, and from there it goes full west. But if the Israelis take hold of this entire area, 5-10 kilometers around, how are these units in Hezbollah in the south going to be supplied? How are they gonna get reinforcements or anything? So this area is the most strategic in this war. And if Israel is going to lose casualties, it's to get this one. And it's not a surprise that they position their best forces in this area as well. This is the most difficult and most strategic. So it all depends what they're planning on doing. I just think that I don't see why they would stop now. I actually read reports at one point where they were talking about, mission accomplished, it's over. And I was like, well, there goes my video. And 2 days later, they got more ground. So I think the problem with this region, if you've been there, and I've been there as a tourist in Lebanon, but what people say and the reality is 2 different things. It's very emotional speech. And I don't mean this as an insult. It's just how people talk when they say, I've seen 10 guys come at me. I'm like, is it really 10 guys? It might be an exaggeration, right? So this is how people talk there. It's very inflated, and this is what gets the people rallied up. That it is what it is. What I mean is that when people say we're going to stop, we're going to continue, we're strong, those are just emotions. But I just look at what's happening on the ground. Yeah. You've been using one map. There's other maps available. We don't know exactly the full extent of what they're the full extent of what they have achieved. What I will say is that the biggest difference is that in 2006, they mainly attacked along the main roads. So they pushed into some sort of blitzkrieg type of warfare using armored formations. And that didn't work out. It's like mounted knights against archers and arquebusiers. No, that failed. So now they're spreading out. They know that they have to capture the hilltops in order to open the path for the road, and they have to do this one step at a time. Just like U.S. forces had to demine paths and clear the road of IEDs before going in. You're not going to send in your armored vehicles without checking if the area is full of IEDs or not. You're going to have your drones also to make sure that the small fire teams, small guys running with AKs, you're going to follow them. You're going to look at where they're going. So how can we think that they're not doing that? It's just that I expected Hezbollah to fight much harder. I mean,
yeah, and what we don't know is are they not fighting harder? Do they not have the missiles we thought? Or is this part of their strategy to draw Israel in further and then all of a sudden bring down the hammer? That's speculation at this point, but it is possible.
What I think is that there was a psychological impact of the pagers attack and the fact that they lost their leader. I mean, you can't deny this hits you. I put myself in the shoes of these guys, and you're like, all the hierarchy's gone. Who, maybe the guy next to me is an informant. The entire structure has been destroyed. We don't know who's the next leader. So there's a lot of uncertainty on the fight. And it's much easier to fight when you have one leader than when it's unknown who's at the head of the organization. And sadly, in my analysis, I cannot say about Hezbollah losses. There's no data. If we knew how many losses they had, it would be easy. But for example, from articles I read, the pager attack took out 1,500 soldiers, fighters. Most of them are alive, but they're wounded, blind, or it was some sort of perverted attack. It's kind of nasty. Nobody ever thought of this because it's kind of poor taste, let's say. But in a way, many troops were hit. So if that pager attack took out so many soldiers, how many fell because of airstrikes? We don't know.
Yeah.
It's just that we'll see. It's just that there's things in time we'll know. Time will tell. It's just that this is the situation now.
Right.
In 1 month, we'll reconsider. We'll be like, okay, how much ground did they gain? If they gained 0 ground, well, that means that Hezbollah was efficient. I can only tell up until now, like the month of October.
Sure. Of course, yeah, and we'll probably bring you back on in a month.
Maybe if the people are happy, look, if the people are watching and think this is interesting, it's good. Let's see in the comment section. But
yeah, it's one of the and listen, one of the reasons why I was really grateful to have you on is because you're one of the few on any network that has done any analysis on this at all. It's just the only thing almost anyone else shows is a bunch of bombs going off in like Lebanon or some of these releases that the Israeli side makes of guys going through the mountains, etc. But nobody's talked about what's been going on. So in that regard, you've done a real service here. Look, and we really appreciate it.
Look, I'm being crucified by certain comments. But it's my duty to talk about this, and I'm not there to please people or not. I'm just there to report on how things are, how I see it on past experience. But if you have any questions, I'm willing to answer. So if you could like that would be great in the video. But if you have any other questions, I'm here, and even I'm curious to see what other questions people would have in the comment section of your comment section. If they have other questions, I'm willing to answer.
Yeah, I hadn't been able to watch those as we've been talking here, but we'll definitely go back through them. But I also want to send everybody, as you see there showing on the screen right now, to History Legends, the channel there, and that's the current vision, the whole video. Strongly recommend you go and watch that. You can click on it right there. I think Gary's got it down in the comment section, not the comment section, the description there, so you can find that down below. So listen, really, really appreciate you coming on. Sorry that you're getting crucified by some of these comments there. They're definitely not warranted, but we appreciate it, I assure you.
Thank you, Dan. It means a lot.
You bet. Thanks a lot, and appreciate you guys watching with us. Be sure and like and subscribe. Go watch that video because you will not regret it. Tomorrow we've got our latest edition of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intel Briefing, where we learned about some of the most important things that happened this week, and there was a lot of them, as well as some things that are going to be happening, in the recent time here. Be sure to join us tomorrow. I believe that's 11 a.m. We'll have that, and we will see you on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.